Alright guys, welcome back to Pac West Bigfoot. This is David, and I do have to tell you guys real quick, unfortunately this week I have a little bit of a cold, so if you could please forgive me, and I will be taking a little sips here and there of some nice hot tea, if you don't mind. This is a longer story this week. Also, I want to say that I'm working on literally over 40 stories, encounter stories, that have come to me from the community here over the last couple months. Even before I lit everything up, I was getting stories, encounter stories from people. So I am working on those. I do web development and marketing during the day for companies and individuals. So, finding time to do all of that, I'm trying to fit it in. So thank you guys for your patience. And I do want these things to just look fabulous and sound great. And also, the response that I'm getting from you out there is just absolutely unbelievable. Thank you so very much for it. And also, pay attention. If you're not a subscriber to PacWestBigfoot.com, please go there and click on subscribe at the top. Get on there. The 21st of December, I will be announcing this month's freebie winner of some really cool stuff. And from there, I'll just let you know via email, and we'll just keep on moving and trucking from there. So thank you so very much for everything. Like I said, as I get into this story, I do have a little bit of a cold today, so please forgive me and give me a little space there for that. And let's go ahead and get into it. This one is called Mother and Teenage Son Encounter Bigfoot While Hunting in Sitka, Alaska. And as a matter of fact, I got a good friend up there, and that's where this encounter story comes from. Some people that he knows. Clear my throat, and we're ready to go. All right. A year ago, this mom took her 14-year-old son hunting for the first time, and we thought it would be our last. See, we had an encounter with Bigfoot while hunting, and it was not a nice one. I know I said it was not a nice encounter. I guess you're probably right. When would it be a good time running into this thing ever? And for those people out there who think it is some lovely hippie-like thing, well, good luck with that. Here's our encounter, Dave. And just so you know, we're doing fine today, for the most part. Part 1. Moving to Bigfoot country. Almost 2 years ago, I lost my husband in a vehicular accident. It was nobody's fault, just an accident. I was now a widow, and my teenage son was without a father. I read the other story, Dave, and I feel sorry, for the lady in Shasta City. Yes, we are believers, and so is he. So is he. So we know that we will all be together again someday. But that does not mean we are not grieving. And I did go through a short bout of anger with God. But after a few months, I got past it, and not only with my faith intact, but stronger, actually. However, I did not want to live in sunny Southern California anymore. I wanted to get back to the part of the world I was raised in, the beautiful Pacific Northwest. I prayed about it and prayed, and then one day the phone rang. It was an old friend from high school I kept in touch with on Facebook, Jordan. He was always a good friend, I remember, even up until we both left for college. Anyways, to make a long story short, as they say, we kept up here and there, and he had a job for me. Jordan had a tackle and bait shop. It was an outdoor store that came with fishing charters, as he owned 2 decent-sized boats. Funny thing is that I was praying for a change, and it was not a couple of weeks in, and boom, good Lord answered that prayer. But not without also giving us a sneak peek into something larger than ourselves. Much larger, in fact. Here's my encounter. Part 2, back to the Pac West. Originally, I am from Blaine, Washington. I moved to Southern California in the mid-1990s when I went to college just north of Los Angeles. I met my late husband there. He was a wonderful man and a great dad. I was a little nervous moving to Sitka, Alaska. I heard the tales of bear encounters and the crazy weather. I guess I've become a city girl, I suppose, over the last decade and a half. But my heart wanted and desired to return to my roots. So here we were, settling into that Alaskan lifestyle. I never lived in Alaska, but I'd been there numerous times, and that included the first little town of Alaska, Sitka. Of course, it would take a few months for my son to get used to it here, and to make new friends in his new school. But he did. He was a great kid. Nice. That made it easier for him, I suppose, to make new friends in the end. Plus, he was big for his age. I guess that can help out a bit, too. He started finding a huge interest in the outdoors, and that was to be expected given the fact people still live off the land here for some of their needs. And it has a tourist-based economy with everything focused on the outdoors here anyways. Jordan's fishing outfit was not just on the water of the bay. It was also guided fly fishing tours in the rough and rugged Alaskan wilderness. As for me, well, as an accountant by trade, I took care of that and was the new store manager, and it came with all the medical perks for my son and myself. Of course, my son wanted to get into hunting and fishing, but was more impressed with bow hunting than anything else. So Jordan gave us a great deal on the best equipment plus discount. I got everything at cost from him. Like I said, he was always a good friend. We started out with practicing in the backyard of the new house. It took a few weeks, but the practice paid off, and his targeting skills improved quickly. The next season we'd be hitting the wilderness, I suppose, for black-tailed deer. And so we did. Part 3, tracking deer or something else. We decided to head out towards the southeast of town near Thimbleberry Lake. We would hike the trail towards the lake itself to find the perfect place to put up a tree stand. There are smaller game trails that shoot off in every direction from the main one people have made, so every 20 to 30 yards or so, there were tracks of all kinds heading out into the deeper bush. The first of 2 days we would spend hiking around for that perfect spot was cloudy, gray, and getting colder by the hour, it felt like, and that was the same for the second day too. I was still not used to the weather just yet. That would take longer than I expected to acclimate myself to. However, it did not rain as we searched and searched for that tree with a perfect view, and that was a true blessing for a place that gets quite a bit of rainfall, especially during the current season we were in at the time. Fall is wet and cold here, and snow some days is not unheard of in the beginning or middle of fall. As we continued looking around for that tree, I kept an eye out for animal tracks, and my son would look for the spot of spots, as he put it. I have to say, while I was having a great time and experience with my son out there, it made me think of his dad more than I had in the last few months. But I felt fine, and we were having fun. I was about 15 paces behind him on the trail heading east in the direction of the lake when I found something out of the ordinary. They were human tracks, at least they looked like it. And an even weirder thing than that was the fact that they were bare human footprints this far out in the middle of nowhere, and in the cold fall weather. The strangest thing of all, however, was the size of them. They were at least 16 inches long or more, to be sure. I could make out 2 perfect tracks. The weather that day was damp, but not damp or wet enough to wash them away. The mud on the trail was more like a soft clay that morning, actually. I had my son come over and take a look. His first reaction was to state that these belonged to the hairy man, or Sasquatch, his Native American friends at school had told him about. Come to find out, I would believe him a couple days later because he was right. They were at least 16 plus inches long, easily. The big toe, however, was a little off. And I mean offset by the outset of the foot more than a normal foot. Whoever it was must be cold and had deformed feet, I thought. I will also tell you that this was so strange, in fact, to observe that I was finding myself looking over my shoulder a little more often than not the rest of the day. By the end of the day, though, we did not find a spot he was happy with, so we decided to come back the next morning and this time head southeast a bit. Part 4, whoop whoop, and not at my looks. The next morning brought more hiking and more weirdness. We headed south along the same trail, and we came across many game trails branching off here and there as well. What I did not expect was the weird whoop whoop sounds from deeper in the bush. They were not that far away, maybe within 75 yards or less even. The whooping was deep, not like anything I ever remember hearing. But as fast as it came, within just a few seconds or minutes or so, it was gone. Now, I should have been more aware, I know, especially as a mother, but I did not believe in such things as Bigfoot, not even growing up in supposed Bigfoot country. like I did in the upper part of Washington State. Yes, I heard the stories, even at church camp many times as a youth, but I never believed until the next day. Part 5. We were the hunted. To take your son hunting as a dad is one thing. For a mom to take her son hunting, well, it is a little different feeling. And up to that point, we were enjoying ourselves. But that all changed quickly. The next morning came with a light drizzle that stopped the moment we got to our tree stand. That ended up not being a tree stand at all. Instead, we found the perfect rock outcropping on the side of a small incline that flowed down into the trail and into an open area where animal tracks galore could be found. It was still dark when we got to our spot, and while we sipped on coffee, my son sipped on hot cocoa I put in his new camouflaged thermos. I was only armed with a handgun for safety. I was not hunting myself. I was just there for my son. He had his bow resting in his lap and ready for action just before the sun started to begin its ascent above the horizon behind us. All was quiet. As a matter of fact, when I looked back on it later, all was way too quiet. Not a sound. It was about 45 minutes into the hunting, more like waiting, when I noticed my son become still and white as a ghost. I thought maybe he was getting nervous as he had finally spotted his first deer of the morning. You can get rather nervous, I suppose, when you're hunting for the first time. But that is not the sense I was getting seconds later when he slowly reached back and grabbed my leg rather hard. His face was still the color of the sheets I washed yesterday as he whispered to me and pointed directly ahead, about 40 yards past the open area around the trail and into the thick of the trees. It was still somewhat dark, but there was a little light that allowed us to see a little way off. The reason we did not choose a tree to get up in was because all the trees around this great little area were smaller. They could not really hold a person. The tallest ones were at least a couple 100 yards into the thicker bush, whereas the trees that surrounded us on average were no taller than 12 to 18 feet tops. That is how I could tell that whatever that dark shadow was standing there was at least 8 feet tall. It was a shadow at best from this distance. However, it did not have the natural shapes about it that you would find out here, near the early dawn light in a forest. The curves were just different. It looked as though a very tall person was standing between two trees that were no taller than 9 to 10 feet themselves. Their head reached almost to the top of them, maybe 6-7 inches smaller, was all. My son kept tilting his head back and forth, and as he did, he noticed that whatever or whoever it was, well, they seemed to be moving closer. Looking up after whispering to him, I noticed that the shadow was now about 15 to 20 feet closer than it was only seconds ago. It had moved this time behind a tree. Only half of its body could be seen, as if it was trying to hide, but not really, if that makes any sense. We stared for what seemed about 30 or so seconds, and that is when I noticed there was absolutely no noise whatsoever. None. The only sound I could hear were the whispers exchanged back and forth between my son and I. His eventually stopped, though, as this monster came into sight, and quickly. Part 6, the monster of the forest. My son was freaked out. I thought for a moment that he might have been going into shock. He was pointing, and as he did, his hand was shaking horribly. And I will also say this much. He wet himself. I hate to mention it, but I just want you to know how scary looking this thing was. It was lightning fast as well. It almost leaped from the tree as it was half hidden behind. It was now less than 50 yards away from us, almost on the trail itself. It was a reddish-brown color, and it was about as tall as I thought it was before it moved closer to us. It was huge. The shoulder span I can remember being massive, 3-4 feet across, maybe more. I just don't know. It was massive. The arms were long and extremely muscular, and it had 5 fingers on its massive hands. I got a great look at this animal in the morning light. I think I got a better look at it as the light was shining from our backs and onto its face at that point. The eyes were huge and reflected a reddish color. The face, that is what scared us the most, I suppose, besides its massive body. There was no hair above the nose until just about where, it might have eyebrows like us, although I did not notice any eyebrows, just hair past that point. The mouth was huge, and I noticed no protruding ears like ours at all either. It was a droopy-looking face, if you can imagine that. It was as if it were a little saggy or long, and it looked wrinkled like dried fruit. The skin seemed grayish in color, and when it started to open its mouth to scream, I could recognize canines, and they must have been rather large, seeing how I noticed them from that far away. The creature was huge, I tell you. The scream came, and that is when I felt like peeing my own pants. The vibration of sound simply cut right through you. As it screamed, it bent slightly forward and directed the sound right at us. It knew we were there, and it could see us clearly. I started to panic at that point. If it were not for my son, I don't know what would happen next. I truly believe he saved us from the hairy man that day. Once the scream stopped, the huge beast of a thing took another step forward from behind the tree, and when I mean step, it must have been a 5-foot stride. I felt a tug on my belt at that moment, and it turned out to be a tug on my holster my gun was in. A shot rang out, and it hurt my ears. I put my hands over my ears in a flash, and the panic feeling I was having seemed to have stopped right then and there. He did not hit his target. As a matter of fact, my son intentionally shot over its head. It took a few seconds, but that creature was all of a sudden wide-eyed, stared at us for a moment, looked back over its left shoulder, and within just a few steps, maybe 3 or 4 to be sure, it was gone. It disappeared into the thicket of trees, heading downhill into the ravine on the other side of the trail. We were frightened. Part 7. Alaska living today. A year later. We're going hunting this year, Dave. However, I am taking my friend Jordan with us. As a matter of fact, to tell you the truth, we've been dating for a couple months now. But like I said, my son and I, plus one, are heading out into the Alaska wilderness to hunt this year. Yes, it was a very fearful day, that day, or encounter, but between my son's friends and their family members, Native Americans, helping us through the emotions of it, it is making it easier to get past. And Jordan was great by getting us to get out there again in the wild only a few weeks after the encounter, actually. Yeah, I was fishing just out of town a couple miles, but it started to do its intended job. I would say we are afraid a bit still about being out there, and even Jordan admits that he may lack that fear due to never observing such an animal. But we will not let that stop our new life here in Alaska, not my son and I. As a matter of fact, it has made me a little more interested in Bigfoot, to a point that I am thinking about starting up a research group here in Sitka. No matter what I decide to do, though, I would not wish that day away if I could. Actually, I feel safer now knowing it exists, and at least know, now that I know the truth, it'd be easier. I would not be caught by surprise again, and I am always armed while out and about in the forest around Sitka, Alaska today.